Ready for an adventure? Today we're going deep into Yarmouth County, Nova Scotia.
Ooh, sounds exciting.
It is. We've got this amazing manuscript history from 1875. It's like a time machine, right?
It really is. And get this, a whole committee of local experts vetted it back then. We can be pretty sure it's accurate.
Wow, so we're getting the real deal here. And usually this thing is locked up, right? Not available to just anyone.
Yeah, this digitized copy is special access, not your everyday find.
Okay, so what kind of secrets are we going to unlock in this deep dive?
Well, we'll see how tough it was for those early settlers, what happened with the Acadian expulsion, and how Yarmouth became like a shipping superstar.
All that in one manuscript. Sign me up. Let's get started. Where do we even begin with Yarmouth County? Paint me a picture.
Okay, so picture this. Beautiful rivers, the Pubnico, Argyll, Tusket, all flowing into Yarmouth Harbor. Gorgeous lakes like Lake Vaughan. Sounds lovely, right?
Yeah, like a postcard.
But, and here's the catch, settling there was anything but easy.
So looks can be deceiving, huh?
Totally. The author of our manuscript even says, like, sometimes the little local details are more interesting, more important than these big national stories.
And like the small stuff tells the real story, right?
Exactly. So are you ready for those small stories, the ones that made Yarmouth what it is?
I am. Now, who was there before the English? I mean, way before.
Right, before the English, you had the indigenous people, the Mi'kmaq. Our manuscript doesn't have tons on them, but there's this really cool thing the author did. They tried to record and even translate Mi'kmaq place names.
Wow. So they were trying to preserve that connection to the original people.
Yeah, it's powerful. Like Keespujiak, that became Yarmouth. Or Malegikoke, now it's Kelly's Cove. Layers of history right there in the names.
You make me want to go explore and see what other traces are still there.
You should. But before the English came, there were also the French Acadians, already settled. It's a bit mysterious exactly when and how they got there.
Mystery already. I like where this is going. So when do the English finally show up?
Fast forward to 1761, that's when they arrive. But they hit a wall, hard times, brutal winters, not enough food, depending on supplies that didn't always make it.
So they went from their comfy lives to, what, survival mode?
You got it. Imagine being so hungry you're eating animal hides. The manuscript even says some people starved.
That's just awful. Makes you appreciate what they went through.
It does. But spring came. A supply ship arrived. Relief you can't even imagine. There's even this funny story about one guy. After months of nothing, he almost ate himself sick on biscuits.
From starving to stuffing himself silly, that's quite a swing.
It really shows how desperate things were. And in all this chaos, one guy stands out, John Crawley.
Who was he? Some kind of hero?
He was a settler, but also the registrar, militia captain, and a justice of the peace, a busy guy.
Sounds like they needed someone who could do it all back then.
Yep. And here's another twist. The main town shifted. It went from Chebogue to Yarmouth.
Why would they move?
It's a good question. This probably helped Yarmouth break away from Shelburne later on. Imagine trying to get anything done with your county seat so far away, especially back then.
Makes sense. As Yarmouth grew, they wanted to run their own show.
Exactly. But hold on, before we get to that breakup, there's this whole religious upheaval that shakes things up in the late 1700s. Enter Henry Aline, an itinerant preacher with this fiery New Light style.
New Light preaching, what's that all about?
It wasn't just the preaching, it was the whole message, challenging the established church, the one led by Reverend Jonathan Scott.
So old ways versus new ways, a battle of beliefs.
And something deeper, too. People wanting a more personal, emotional experience of their faith.
It's about how you connect with what you believe, right?
And this yearning, it caused a split, paved the way for the Baptist denomination to take root in Yarmouth.
So Aline set off a chain reaction, changed everything.
He sure did. And leading this Baptist movement, you had Reverend Harris Harding, another fascinating figure. But before we get to him, let's zoom in on those early years. What was life actually like for these settlers?
Okay, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What was daily life like?
Picture this, the no paved roads, no cars, not even decent carriages. Getting around was an adventure.
Sounds rough. A bit different from our world, huh?
You said it. They described the road from Yarmouth to Chebogue as like an Indian footpath, just marked by trees, mud, stumps, rocks, and swamps you had to avoid.
I wouldn't want to try that in winter.
No kidding. It did get a little better. In 1768, they laid out some important roads, probably because more people were coming and they needed to connect.
Makes sense as things grew. What about Argyll? Did they get in on the road action?
Argyll had its own issues. The land ownership was all messed up, lots of absentee landlords, so their roads lagged behind for quite a while.
Out of sight, out of mind for those landlords, huh?
Pretty much. But amidst all that, they still craved spiritual guidance, that community connection. For the first 5 years, they held religious meetings in homes. Then, in 1766, things changed.
What happened? Did they build a church, finally?
Not a church, but a meeting house in Chibok.
Mm-hmm.
Shows how their sense of community, of shared faith, was growing. They needed that dedicated space.
It's amazing how people create community even when times are tough.
Totally. And remember those Acadians we talked about?
Mhm.
The ones who got expelled?
Yeah, what about them?
Well, some actually came back. In 1767, 18 families asked for land around Barrington. They got it, after swearing allegiance, of course.
So they found their way back home after all that. What about the ones who might have stayed hidden during the expulsion? Did they just vanish?
That's the thing. The source makes you wonder if that whole expulsion story was a bit exaggerated. Maybe some hid in the woods, even lived with a Micmac. Others might have just stayed put and nobody bothered them.
History is rarely simple, right? There's always more to the story. Speaking of more to the story, we were talking about Yarmouth splitting from Shelburne. What were the big reasons for that?
Distance was a huge factor. Doing any business with Shelburne as the county seat, it was a nightmare. Roads were barely passable, no bridges over rivers.
Like trying to have a meeting with someone who lives on a deserted island.
Exactly. So, as Yarmouth got bigger, more important, they wanted to govern themselves. They sent a petition to the governor, listing all their problems.
So it wasn't just them being rebellious, they had a real reason.
Oh yeah, and it worked. 1784, boom, Yarmouth's a separate county, a community coming into its own.
Taking control of their destiny. Inspiring. Now, what about the Loyalists? Sounds like a whole new wave of people coming in.
You got it. As we get to the late 1700s, the Loyalists arrive, those who stayed loyal to the British crown during the American Revolution.
So where did they settle? Did they spread out or stick together?
Tuscany became their main hub. They brought all their skills, their ways of doing things, a whole new mix for the region.
Adding to that cultural blend we were talking about.
Exactly. And it wasn't just numbers. Lots of them were educated, had important positions. They really shaped Yarmouth. There's this one story that shows just how tough it was for them, how resilient they had to be.
Ooh, a story. I love a good story. What happened?
Deborah Smith, a Loyalist, she described leaving New York, arriving in Shelburne, facing a brutal winter. It's amazing how people adapt and build new lives even when it's so hard.
It reminds us that there are real people behind all these historical events. Speaking of building, what about churches? We talked about that meeting house in Chibok, but what about in Yarmouth itself? Did they have their own place of worship early on?
Good point. Seems like Yarmouth didn't get their own meeting house until 1787. Chibok was the place to be at first.
So they depended on that Chibok meeting house for a while. What made them finally build their own?
By the late 1780s, Yarmouth was catching up. More people, more influence. They needed their own space for worship and for community gatherings.
Like a declaration of independence, in a way. They were ready to stand on their own 2 feet.
Exactly. The source even has details about how they agreed to build it, raising funds, everyone pitching in fairly.
Organized and determined. Shows how committed they were to building a strong community.
It does. And as we get deeper into the late 1700s, there's this whole other religious revolution brewing.
Wait, didn't we already talk about a religious shift with Henry Alline and the Baptists?
We did, but this is different. Think internal struggles, transformations within the religious scene, beliefs changing, power dynamics, people searching for deeper meaning.
Ooh, this sounds juicy. Give me the details. What's going on?
It's a story of personalities clashing, power shifting, a whole community wrestling with these big spiritual questions. And at the heart of it all, there's Henry Alline again. His arrival set off a chain reaction that changed everything about religion in Yarmouth.
Okay, now I'm really hooked. Where do we start with this religious revolution? So this religious revolution, it's more like internal drama within the church, not some new group coming in.
Yeah, you could say that. Remember Reverend Jonathan Scott, the pastor of that established church? Well, he's got this big challenge on his hands when Henry Alline arrives with his New Light preaching.
Hold on, wasn't New Light preaching what started the Baptists? I'm a little lost on how this is different.
I get it. Alline's ideas did lead to those Baptist churches popping up, but this time it's about the impact on the existing church, the one Scott was leading.
Ah, okay. So it's like Align's ideas stir things up inside the church before they spill over and create whole new denominations.
Exactly. Think of it like ripples. Allen throws this stone in the water, and it causes all these waves of, like, spiritual soul searching for the people in Scott's church.
Allen was a real disruptor then, whether people liked it or not.
For sure. His style was all about emotion, personal experience, connecting directly with God. Totally different from that formal, intellectual way of the Congregational church.
It's interesting how these different approaches can exist together but also cause friction. What did Reverend Scott think about all this?
Put yourself in his shoes. You've been leading this flock for years, and suddenly this charismatic guy shows up, stealing the show with this intense emotional message. Scott probably felt like his authority, the whole way things were done, was under attack.
Sounds like a recipe for conflict. Did things get ugly between Scott and Allen?
The manuscript doesn't give us all the juicy details, but you can bet there was tension. What we know is a bunch of Scott's people loved Alline's ideas. That's what caused the split.
So Allen didn't just start a new church. He split the existing one right down the middle.
Yep, shows the power of ideas, right?
Yeah.
They can change how people think, but also how a whole community works.
It's a good reminder that history is about people, their beliefs, and what they do because of those beliefs.
You got it. And this leads us to another big moment for religion in Yarmouth. Reverend Harris Harding and the rise of the Baptists.
Okay, so now we're back to the Baptist story. What did Harding do?
He was all in on those new light ideas from Align. Charismatic guy, helped those Baptist churches really get going in Yarmouth. His preaching was powerful, and he was dedicated to his people. That helped the Baptist movement take root for good.
It sounds like he built on what Allen started, gave people a spiritual home where they could find that emotional connection they were looking for.
Right on. Harding was more than just a preacher, though. He was a social activist, a real advocate for education, and for helping people who were struggling.
So a leader in the community, not just the church.
Exactly. Now, while religion is transforming Yarmouth from the inside out, there's another force at play, that booming shipping industry. Remember how we talked about Yarmouth becoming this economic hub?
Yeah. How did they go from tiny settlement to maritime powerhouse? Was it all about shipbuilding, or was there more to it?
Shipbuilding was huge, no doubt. But they were also really smart business people, had these amazing trade networks that took them all over the globe.
Global trade before it was cool. What were these networks like? Who were they trading with? What kinds of stuff?
Let me see. The manuscript says they sailed to the West Indies, Europe, even South America. They'd send out timber, fish, farm stuff, and bring back sugar, molasses, rum, all sorts of manufactured goods.
A real international operation. Hard to imagine this little Nova Scotian town connected to all those places.
It is right. And that brings us to one of the most interesting figures in Yarmouth's maritime history, Anthony Landers.
Intrigued. What's so special about this Landers guy?
He's like the ultimate Yarmouth success story. Starts small, ends up a big-time ship owner with a fleet sailing everywhere. But get this, he wasn't all about the money. The manuscript says he imported new farming equipment from England. He wanted to help the whole community, not just himself.
Smart guy. He knew that his success depended on the success of the whole community. He wasn't just in it for himself.
Exactly. And as Yarmouth's shipping was booming, they realized they needed better infrastructure. Think back to those early days trying to get around. The port needed an upgrade.
Yeah, if you want to be a major player in the game, you need the facilities to handle it, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
Two big things happened. The Yarmouth Lighthouse was built in 1840, and then in 1854 they built the first breakwater. Not just for looks, these were essential for safe navigation and easier trade.
The lighthouse A&D, the breakwater, they were like symbols, showing that Yarmouth was serious about being a maritime power.
Exactly. Those projects were game changers. They made Yarmouth a real force to be reckoned with.
So we've seen Yarmouth go from struggling to survive to becoming this bustling center of trade, all thanks to their shipping industry and a strong sense of community. But what about the people? What was their social life like, beyond all the work and business?
That's a good one. The manuscript is mostly about economics and politics, but it does give us a glimpse into social life in the 1800s. It's a mixed bag. You see progress, but also some disturbing things.
Disturbing, how so?
Well, the Loyalists brought enslaved people with them. That casts a dark shadow over this whole prosperous period. The manuscript talks about people buying and selling other human beings. It's a stark reminder that even when things are good for some, there's terrible injustice happening at the same time.
A tough reminder that progress isn't always fair. Did anyone speak out against slavery in Yarmouth back then?
The manuscript doesn't mention any abolitionist movements specifically in Yarmouth, but it does say that the enslaved people eventually gained their freedom. So attitudes were shifting, even if it took way too long.
It shows that history is complicated, right? Good and bad happening at the same time. We celebrate Yarmouth's successes, but we can't forget those dark parts of their past.
Absolutely. And speaking of challenges, there was that devastating fire in 1820. Ripped through Yarmouth, destroyed so much, left families homeless.
Oh, wow, a fire. That must have been terrifying. What caused it? How did they recover?
The manuscript doesn't say what started it, but it does talk about the amazing support from nearby communities, even as far away as Halifax. People sent donations, money, clothes, food, building supplies, everything Yarmouth needed to rebuild.
It's amazing to see people coming together like that, helping each other out in a crisis.
It really is.
Yeah.
Shows the best side of human nature. In the midst of these tough times, you see social change happening too.
Like what? What was changing in Yarmouth society back then?
Well, for one, temperance societies started popping up. People becoming more aware of the problems with alcohol, wanting to encourage moderation and sobriety.
So they weren't just against drinking altogether, they were worried about the effects of too much alcohol on people, families, the whole community.
Right. They saw drunkenness as a cause of poverty, crime, violence, and they wanted to fix it through education, moral persuasion, and changing society's attitudes.
It's fascinating how these movements for social change often happen alongside big economic and political shifts, like people reevaluating what matters as the world around them transforms.
That's a great point. Seems like as Yarmouth became more successful and influential, they also started paying more attention to social issues, wanting to make things better. And speaking of making things better, let's talk about their roads and transportation. Remember those early settlers struggling with muddy paths and rough terrain?
Yeah, sounds like a real pain just to get from point A to point B. Did things ever improve?
Well, with more people, a booming economy, those old paths just wouldn't cut it anymore. They desperately needed better roads, more efficient ways to move around.
So how did they solve that problem? Did they finally get those paved highways we take for granted?
Not quite paved highways, but they made serious progress. As Yarmouth's economy grew, so did their political influence. They could actually push for better transportation, get those connections to other towns, make trade and travel easier.
So it wasn't just about convenience, it was about staying competitive, keeping the economy rolling. They needed those roads to keep up with their ambitions.
Exactly. The manuscript gets into all the details about how the roads evolved, the struggles they faced, and the clever solutions they came up with. And we get to see how social and political factors played a part too. The hidden stories behind something as everyday as getting from one place to another.
Okay, I'm ready for a bumpy ride. Take me on a tour of Yarmouth's road-building history. Spare no detail.
All right, buckle up. We're going way back to those early days, when roads were just rough trails hacked out of the wilderness. Try transporting goods or traveling any distance in those conditions. A logistical nightmare.
I can't even imagine riding in a horse-drawn carriage on those roads, let alone driving a car.
No kidding. But as Yarmouth grew and trade expanded, those paths were just not sustainable. And that brings us to a really interesting chapter, corduroy roads.
Corduroy roads? What in the world are those?
Picture a road made entirely of logs, laid side by side, just like the ribs in corduroy fabric, hence the name. They were common in swampy, muddy areas, way more stable than just dirt, but oh boy, talk about a bumpy ride.
Innovative for the time, but I bet those corduroy roads were rough on carriages and even rougher on the people riding in them.
You said it. The manuscript is full of complaints about the bone-jarring ride and how those roads would wreck carriages. But they were a necessary evil until they figured out better ways to build roads.
It sounds like a constant battle against nature and against their own limited technology just to create some semblance of a transportation system.
You got it. As Yarmouth's economy took off, they put more effort into their roads, ditching those bumpy corduroy paths for something more durable, more comfortable. This allowed them to move goods faster, expand their trade, and connect with the world more easily.
So their raids became a symbol of progress, of their ambition to reach beyond their little corner of the world.
Exactly. And that leads us to another crucial piece of their transportation puzzle, bridges. Remember those scary river crossings we talked about? Well, building bridges was a huge deal back then. They needed engineering know-how and a lot of money.
I can only imagine how hard it was to build bridges over those wide, unpredictable rivers.
You're telling me. It was a major challenge. But as Yarmouth gained economic and political power, they were able to attract talented engineers and secure the funds to build those vital connections.
A real testament to their determination and their smarts. What kind of bridges did they build? Were they just wood, or did they eventually use stronger materials?
At first, most were timber, cheap and readily available, right?
Yeah.
But as technology improved and they had more money, they started using stone and iron, which were much more durable.
So their bridges became more than just ways to cross a river. They showed off their progress, their skills as engineers.
You got it. And the manuscript is full of amazing stories about these bridge-building projects, the controversies, the impact on people's lives, even some collapses that must have been shocking for the community.
It sounds like those bridge-building stories are a perfect example of Yarmouth's journey. Ambition, innovation, setbacks, and ultimately this unstoppable drive to progress. Now, I want to go back to those social changes we touched on earlier. Those temperance societies, were they a big deal in Yarmouth or just a small group of people?
The temperance movement was gaining steam all over North America in the 1800s, and Yarmouth was no exception. The manuscript makes it clear that temperance societies were pretty active there, pushing for people to drink less and pointing out all the problems caused by drunkenness.
So they weren't just saying no to alcohol entirely, they were concerned about the impact of alcohol abuse on everyone.
Exactly. They saw it as the root of poverty, crime, domestic violence. They wanted to tackle those issues through education, appealing to people's morals, and social reform.
It's interesting how these reform movements often reflect how a society's values are changing. As Yarmouth became more prosperous and influential, they also started to grapple with complex social issues and the need for change.
That's a great observation. And this leads us to another fascinating part of Yarmouth's social history, education. Early on, education was pretty informal. Kids learned basic reading and math at home or from traveling teachers. But as Yarmouth grew and became more diverse, they needed a more organized, comprehensive system.
They realized that education was essential, not just a luxury.
For sure. So they started building schools, hiring qualified teachers, and creating a curriculum that would equip kids for a changing world.
They were investing in their future, giving their children the tools to succeed.
Exactly. And the manuscript tells us all about their efforts, the challenges they encountered, the creative solutions they developed, and the passionate people who dedicated their lives to education. We also see the social and political debates about education, the different views and values that shaped this crucial part of Yarmouth's development.
It's like their journey in education mirrors their overall story. Always striving for progress, adapting to new situations, and believing deeply in the power of education to transform lives.
Perfectly put. And as we move deeper into the 19th century, we encounter another huge turning point for Yarmouth, the arrival of the railway.
Oh, the railway. Now things are really going to change. I can just imagine the excitement as the railway finally reached Yarmouth, connecting them to this vast network that stretched across the continent.
You got it. The railway was transformative, no doubt about it. It opened up new opportunities for trade, travel, communication. It was progress. It was modernity. It was proof that the world was getting smaller.
I can't wait to hear all about it. Tell me everything.
All right, let's take a ride through the history of the railway in Yarmouth. We'll see the dreams, the struggles, and the lasting impact of this incredible invention.
Lead the way.
We'll start in the mid-1800s, when the idea of a railway linking Yarmouth to the rest of Nova Scotia first emerged. Think about the excitement, people imagining all the possibilities.
It must have seemed like a dream come true after years of dealing with those terrible roads and dangerous river crossings.
You're right. The railway promised faster travel, easier access to markets, a more efficient way to move goods and people.
But I'm sure it wasn't all easy. Building a railway is a huge project, right? It takes a lot of engineering knowledge, money, and political support.
Absolutely. And the manuscript tells us all about the hurdles they faced. Getting the funding, figuring out land rights, overcoming engineering challenges, and of course, dealing with the occasional political squabble.
Sounds like a real test of their determination and ingenuity.
It definitely was. But despite all the setbacks, they never gave up. They believed in the power of the railway to transform their lives.
And in the end, they achieved their dream.
They did. The first train arrived in Yarmouth to a huge celebration. It was a historic moment, the beginning of a new era.
I bet the crowds went wild as that steam engine pulled into the station. It must have been a symbol of progress, a window to a wider world.
It was pure joy. The railway quickly became an essential part of life in Yarmouth. It connected them to Halifax, other towns in Nova Scotia, and eventually to the rest of Canada and beyond.
So it wasn't just about reaching the mainland. It was about joining a network that spanned a continent, creating new opportunities for trade, travel, and communication.
Exactly. And as we look at how the railway affected Yarmouth, we see incredible stories about how it transformed their economy, their social lives, even how they saw themselves.
Okay, tell me more. How did the railway change their economy?
Well, it helped existing industries grow, like fishing, shipbuilding, lumber. They could move their goods faster, reach more customers. The railway also attracted new businesses and industries to Yarmouth, which created more jobs and made their economy even stronger.
The railway was like an economic engine driving growth and prosperity.
It really was, and that economic boon had a big impact on their social lives, too.
Oh, how
Well,
so?
now it was easier and cheaper to travel. People could visit family and friends in other places, go to events, even take vacations. It also brought new people and ideas to Yarmouth, expanding their horizons and introducing them to different cultures.
So the railway wasn't just moving goods and people, it was moving ideas and experiences, making their lives richer.
Exactly. And this leads to another fascinating impact: how the railway shaped their identity.
Intriguing. How did that happen?
Before the railway, Yarmouth was kind of isolated. But the railway connected them to the rest of Nova Scotia and Canada, making them feel like they were part of something bigger. It changed their sense of belonging, their place in the world.
It's like the railway broadened their perspective, blurring the lines between local and national, rural and urban.
You got it. And if we dig deeper, we see how the railway influenced their politics, their social interactions, even their art.
It's amazing how one invention could have such a huge impact on so many aspects of life.
It really is. And this brings us to another chapter that's closely linked to the railway: the rise of tourism.
Oh, tourism. That makes sense. With easier access to Yarmouth, more people would be tempted to visit those beautiful coastal towns.
Exactly. The railway made it easier for tourists to reach Yarmouth from other parts of Nova Scotia, Canada, and even the United States. People wanted to escape the city and experience the peacefulness of the coast, the blend of history and culture that Yarmouth offered.
So the railway helped turn Yarmouth into a tourist destination, creating new economic opportunities and introducing them to a whole new world of visitors.
Precisely. And as we explore the history of tourism in Yarmouth, we find stories about the building of hotels and resorts, the advertising campaigns that drew people in, and the social and cultural effects of this growing industry.
It sounds like the railway set off a chain reaction of change and growth, transforming Yarmouth in ways they couldn't have imagined.
It's a truly remarkable story. And as we wrap up this look at the impact of the railway, it's clear that it left a lasting mark on Yarmouth, shaping their economy, their social lives, and their place in the world. And speaking of lasting marks, let's shift our focus to another important part of Yarmouth's history: the contributions of its people.
Yes. I'm eager to learn about the people who made Yarmouth what it is. We've already met some fascinating characters like John Crawley, Henry Aline, and Anthony Landers. Who else should we know about?
Well, Yarmouth's story is filled with amazing individuals who, through hard work, creativity, and community spirit, left their mark on the town. From the early settlers to the entrepreneurs, the teachers, the artists, their efforts have enriched Yarmouth's history.
It's a testament to the power of a community where everyone, in their own way, contributed to their shared story.
Absolutely. And as we delve into their lives, we discover stories of triumph and struggle, innovation and tradition, and a deep love for their hometown. We meet daring sea captains, clever business leaders, brilliant inventors, and compassionate philanthropists, all contributing to the vibrant tapestry of Yarmouth's history.
I'm ready to be inspired. Tell me about them.
All right, let's start with a remarkable woman named Marianne Shadd Carey.
Marianne Shadd Carey. That name sounds familiar. Wasn't she a prominent figure in the fight to abolish slavery?
That's right. Marianne Shadd Carey was a tireless advocate for ending slavery and a champion for racial justice. And she had a connection to Yarmouth, a short but important time in her life.
Really? I had no idea what brought her to Yarmouth.
In the 1850s, Marianne Shadd Carey was deeply involved in the Underground Railroad, helping enslaved people escape to freedom in Canada. Yarmouth, with its busy port and closeness to the United States, was a key destination for many of those seeking freedom.
So Yarmouth played a role in that crucial part of North American history, offering a safe haven for those fleeing slavery.
Exactly. And Marianne Shadd Carey's presence in Yarmouth underscored the town's commitment to freedom and justice. She started a school for black children, published an anti-slavery newspaper, and fought tirelessly for the rights of those who had escaped to Canada for a better life.
She sounds like a real force to be reckoned with, using her voice and her actions to challenge injustice and create a fairer society.
She was truly inspiring. Her story reminds us of the role that even small towns like Yarmouth played in the struggle for racial equality.
It's a powerful reminder that even places far from the center of things can be crucibles for change and progress.
Absolutely. And speaking of change and progress, let's turn our attention to another fascinating part of Yarmouth's history, the development of their cultural life.
Cultural life. What kinds of cultural activities were popular in Yarmouth?
Well, in those early days, life was mostly about survival and building a community. But as Yarmouth became more prosperous and stable, its people started to cultivate a rich cultural scene, embracing music, theater, literature, and the arts.
So they were feeding their souls as well as their bodies.
Exactly. And the manuscript gives us glimpses into this cultural blossoming, revealing a community that valued creativity, self-expression, and the search for beauty amidst the challenges of daily life. We find stories about amateur plays, lively musical gatherings, and the emergence of local artists and writers who captured the essence of Yarmouth and its people.
They understood that a thriving community is more than just economics. It's about creating a sense of shared identity, a richness of culture.
You're right. And this brings us to one of the most iconic symbols of Yarmouth cultural legacy, the Yarmouth Lighthouse.
Oh, the lighthouse. We talked about it before as part of their maritime infrastructure, but it's also a cultural icon.
Absolutely. Beyond its job of guiding ships, the Yarmouth Lighthouse has become a beloved landmark, representing the town's connection to the sea and inspiring countless artists.
It's fascinating how something built for a practical purpose can also become a symbol full of meaning that goes beyond its original function.
Exactly. And as we delve into the story of the Yarmouth Lighthouse, we discover fascinating stories about its construction, the legends surrounding it, and its special place in the hearts of Yarmouth's people.
I'm eager to hear more. Tell me everything.
All right, let's travel back to 1840, when the Yarmouth Lighthouse first shone its light, guiding sailors safely to shore.
It must have been a symbol of hope and safety for those navigating those dangerous waters off the coast.
It definitely was. And building it showed how committed Yarmouth was to their maritime identity and to protecting those who sailed the seas.
I imagine being the lighthouse keeper was a lonely job, but also a very important one, keeping the light burning every night to protect those at sea.
You're right. The lighthouse keeper had to be constantly alert, dedicated, and have a deep understanding of the sea and its moods.
It sounds like a solitary life, but one with a lot of purpose and a sense of responsibility for others.
Exactly. And the manuscript gives us a glimpse into the lives of those lighthouse keepers, their hardships, their triumphs, and their close bond with the sea.
They were like guardians of the coast, watching over Yarmouth and its people, ensuring their safety and prosperity.
You've put it beautifully. And as we explore the history of the Yarmouth Lighthouse, we discover stories of storms weathered, lives saved, and the enduring connection between the lighthouse and the community it served.
It's a beacon of hope and resilience, representing the enduring spirit of Yarmouth.
It truly is. And as we conclude this exploration of Yarmouth's cultural legacy, it's evident that their story is a powerful example of human creativity, the strength of community, and how even a small town can cultivate a rich and vibrant cultural life.
It's been an incredible journey, filled with fascinating stories, compelling characters, and insightful reflections on the forces that have shaped Yarmouth's destiny. As we reflect on everything we've learned, what stands out to you as the most defining aspect of Yarmouth's story?
That's a great question. For me, it's their amazing resilience and adaptability. From the first settlers facing harsh winters and lack of food, to the challenges of building a thriving economy and navigating the complexities of social change, the people of Yarmouth have consistently shown an unwavering spirit of determination and a willingness to embrace new ideas and adapt to changing circumstances. And that spirit, combined with their deep sense of community and their unwavering belief in the power of human ingenuity, has enabled them to overcome adversity, seize opportunities, and create a legacy that continues to inspire future generations.
It's been a privilege to delve into their story and to witness the indomitable spirit that has shaped Yarmouth's journey.
The pleasure has been all mine.
It's amazing to think how much we've uncovered, right? From those early settlers just trying to make it, to the railway, to their whole cultural scene blooming. Yarmouth has quite the story. But I'm wondering, after all those changes, is there still something unique about Yarmouth? Have they kept their identity?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I'd say absolutely yes. They've changed a lot over the years, but Yarmouth never forgot where they came from. Their history, their traditions, the connection to the sea, it's all deeply woven into who they are.
Yeah, I can see that. their maritime heritage. That's huge, right? From the early days of fishing and shipbuilding to that iconic lighthouse. What else makes them unique, do you think?
Their location has a lot to do with it, for sure. Yarmouth, right on the southwestern tip of Nova Scotia. Rugged coast, beautiful harbors, those fertile valleys inland. It creates a strong sense of place, a connection to nature that you don't find everywhere.
It's like the land itself shaped their character, made them resilient, resourceful. They had to be tough to thrive in that environment.
Exactly. And we can't forget all the different people who've called Yarmouth home. Think about it. The Micmac, they were there first. Then the Acadians, the English settlers, the Loyalists, and even black refugees escaping slavery. Each group brought something special, added their own piece to Yarmouth's cultural mix.
A real melting pot of cultures, coming together to create something new and unique.
You got it. And you see it everywhere in their music, their food, their art, their stories. That's what gives Yarmouth its distinct flavor, that welcoming feeling.
Speaking of welcoming, I've heard Yarmouth is known for being friendly, hospitable. Is that connected to their history at all?
Absolutely. Hospitality is deeply rooted in Yarmouth's past. Go back to those early days. Newcomers depended on the kindness of others to survive. That tradition of welcoming outsiders, lending a helping hand, it's been passed down for generations. It's part of who they are.
It's great to hear that, especially in today's world, which feels so divided sometimes. It shows their compassion, their understanding of what community really means.
I agree. And that community spirit, that's another core part of their identity. Look back at their history. They faced so many challenges: economic hardship, natural disasters. But every time they came together, supported each other, rebuilt.
They understood that their strength was in unity, in setting aside differences and working together.
Right. And you see it in all their community groups, the volunteer work they do, their dedication to preserving their heritage. They're proud of who they are and where they come from.
It sounds like they found that balance, moving forward, but never forgetting their past. A community that's both modern and deeply connected to its roots.
You've summed it up perfectly. Yarmouth's story shows us the power of community, the importance of embracing diversity, and the enduring spirit of people who meet challenges head-on and come out even stronger.
It's been an incredible journey uncovering those hidden stories of Yarmouth and discovering the spirit that defines them. As we wrap up our deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will think about?
I'd say the most important thing to remember is this. Yarmouth's story isn't just a list of dates and events. It's about the human spirit, that ability to overcome, to adapt, to create thriving communities, even when things are tough. Their story reminds us that even the smallest towns can make a difference in history. And the things we do today, the choices we make, they have an impact that reaches far beyond ourselves. They create ripples that will be felt for generations to come. So keep exploring, keep discovering those hidden stories, not just in Yarmouth, but everywhere. There's so much to learn from the past, and it's all waiting to be uncovered.
That's a great note to end on. It's been a pleasure exploring Yarmouth with you today. Thanks for sharing your expertise.
The pleasure was all mine. Thanks for having me.